I'm Steve, 47 years old, and I want to share a story from my life that started over 25 years ago, back when I was a naive college kid. It's about the woman who became my ex-wife, Julia, and the painful lessons I learned about love and betrayal. This tale is a warning, especially for younger folks, about the dangers of marrying too soon and forgiving someone who cheats. My wife and I stumbled across some videos about relationships 6 months ago, and we've been hooked ever since. She encouraged me to write this down, hoping it might help others avoid the mistakes I made. Back when I was 18, if I'd had advice like this, I might have dodged a lot of heartache. My story screams one truth loud and clear: never take back a cheater. Trust me, I learned it the hard way. This all began in college, where I met Julia, who was my age, and my best friend Andrew, who I'd known since we were kids. Andrew and I grew up in the same small town, and Julia hailed from there too. But we didn't cross paths until we ended up at the same college, about 30 miles from home. The three of us shared some classes, started studying together, and quickly became thick as thieves. We called ourselves the Three Musketeers, though Julia jokingly dubbed us the Three Stooges. We were inseparable, hitting up movies, parties, hiking trails, bike rides, and the gym during our freshman and sophomore years. At that point, we were just buddies, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something more for Julia. Both Andrew and I had a crush on Julia, but neither of us mustered the courage to make a move. She kept us firmly in the friend zone, and I was too scared to risk our friendship by confessing my feelings. Andrew, who always had more luck with women, tried dropping hints to Julia, but she brushed him off. I was head over heels for her, but I stayed quiet, worried I'd mess up what we had. Looking back, I wish I'd been bolder. Life's too short to hide how you feel. Instead, Andrew and I dated other girls, but none of them held a candle to Julia in my eyes. She dated a few guys too, but those relationships fizzled fast, and she'd always come back to hanging out with us. Things changed at the start of our junior year. One night, after spending time with friends at a bar, I was walking Julia back to her dorm. Andrew wasn't there. He was out on a date. We'd both had a bit too much to drink, and somehow, we got into a heated argument. I can't even recall what sparked it, but I remember how stunning she looked, even as she glared at me. Fueled by liquid courage, I grabbed her hand, pulled her close, and kissed her. To my shock and thrill, she kissed me back. We paused, locked eyes, and kissed again, the moment stretching on like something out of a movie. That night changed everything. Julia later admitted she'd been waiting 2 years for me to make a move. After that, we were a couple, and we stayed together through the rest of college. Andrew was probably a bit envious, since he'd liked Julia too, but he seemed happy for us. The three of us kept hanging out, even though Julia and I were now an item. After graduation, Julia went to nursing school for 2 years, while I moved back home to work in my parents' property management business. We handled rentals, HOA fees, tenant services, and contracted out property improvements. The business was thriving, and I gradually took over the day-to-day operations. Andrew also returned to our hometown, landing a job with the city government. During Julia's nursing school years, we saw each other almost every weekend, since she was only 30 minutes away. Often, we'd spend time with Andrew, though Julia and I cherished our alone time too. After nursing school, Julia moved back and started working as a pediatric nurse at our local hospital. She adored her job and had a soft spot for kids. We moved in together, and a year later, at 24, we got married. Andrew was my best man, and I'd never felt happier. Looking back, we were too young to tie the knot. We barely knew ourselves, let alone each other. Julia and I started talking about having kids, something we both wanted badly. We tried for years, but nothing happened. After weeks of medical tests, we learned I was infertile and couldn't father children. The news crushed Julia. We discussed artificial insemination and adoption, but she was set on experiencing pregnancy and childbirth. This was about 4 years into our marriage, when we were both 28, and it marked the beginning of tougher times. One day, I ran into an old high school pal I hadn't seen in over 10 years while walking down the street. We caught up, swapping stories about where life had taken us since our teenage days. He mentioned spotting Andrew a few days earlier, around noon, outside a hotel, locking lips with an attractive woman. Not wanting to barge in, he didn't say hi to Andrew. Curious, I wondered who Andrew was dating now and if I might know her. I asked my buddy if he recognized the woman, but he said she was a stranger to him. Then he described her. Her hair color, height, and outfit matched Julia perfectly, right down to the nursing uniform she always wore. I asked if she had her hair in a ponytail, like Julia does at work to keep it out of the way, and after a moment's thought, he confirmed she did. My stomach sank, but I casually said I might know her, trying to keep my cool. Deep down, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. My gut screamed that it was Julia, not some lookalike. That night, when Julia got home from her shift, I confronted her, asking point-blank if she was cheating with Andrew. Her face went white, but she insisted the idea was ridiculous, swearing she'd never betray me. I told her about my friend's sighting, Andrew and a woman who matched her description kissing outside a hotel at lunchtime. She claimed it must have been a mistake, that it couldn't have been her. I wasn't buying it. The details were too spot on. I laid it out. Our marriage was done unless she came clean. It took everything in me to stand firm, especially remembering how much I'd loved her back in college, but I couldn't ignore the truth staring me in the face. Julia broke down in tears, and after a moment, she looked away, admitting she'd been seeing Andrew, my best friend since we were kids. The betrayal hit like a punch to the gut. She explained that Andrew had always wanted her, even back when we were competing for her in college, and his ego couldn't handle that I'd won her heart. I asked how long it had been going on, and she said they'd been meeting during her lunch breaks. She tried to downplay it, saying it didn't mean anything, that she loved me, but had always found Andrew's bad boy charm hard to resist. Apparently, he'd made a move, and she gave in. She promised to cut things off with him immediately, begging to stay married. She called it a mistake, swore she'd never do it again, and vowed to be the perfect wife if I forgave her. She even said she'd never speak to Andrew again, claiming I was her everything. I asked if they'd hooked up in college, a suspicion I'd buried for years. She admitted they'd occasionally slept together back then, but she ended it when we became a couple, saying she chose me because I was reliable, unlike Andrew. Hearing that only made the betrayal sting worse. Furious, I told her to pack her things and leave. I was done. She sobbed harder, pleading that she didn't want a divorce, that Andrew meant nothing, and that I was her entire world. She said she'd do anything to fix things, begging me to tell her how to make it right. Her tears were relentless, but I held my ground, repeating that she needed to get out. I couldn't stand being in the same room with her anymore. She kept crying, but I stood firm, telling her I'd never forgive her and that I wanted her out of my life for good. As she went to pack, she made one last desperate plea to stay, but I shut it down and told her to leave. She finally walked out, and I slammed the door behind her, left alone with the crushing reality that the woman I loved and my lifelong best friend had stabbed me in the back. I was reeling, wondering how they could do this to me. Andrew blew up my phone with apologies, but I vowed never to speak to him again, a promise I've kept. I miss Julia terribly, though, and the love I'd felt for her didn't just vanish overnight. For days later, on a Saturday, I heard a knock at the door after getting back from the gym. It was Julia, bag in hand, looking at me with desperate eyes. I shut the door in her face. She started sobbing, so loudly I could hear it through the door. I shouted for her to leave, but she kept crying on my doorstep. I considered calling the police, but I figured they'd see a distraught woman outside her home and might even side with her, especially if she spun a story about me locking her out. After 10 minutes of her relentless sobbing, I opened the door and told her to go. She was making a scene, and the neighbors might call the cops. She stood there, tears streaming, refusing to budge. I closed the door again, hoping she'd give up, but she didn't. For another 40 minutes, she cried outside, banking on me being the nice guy who'd cave. It reminded me of a kid throwing a tantrum in a store, hoping their parents would give in. Finally, exasperated, I opened the door and let her inside, thinking I could convince her to leave for good. She rushed in, wrapping her arms around me, refusing to let go. She swore she couldn't live without me, called her affair a horrible mistake, and begged me to take her back, promising she'd never hurt me again. When I pried her off, she collapsed to the floor, still sobbing, saying the 4 days apart were the worst of her life, and that she'd rather die than lose me. I told her she had to go, but she insisted she wasn't leaving, clinging to the hope that I'd soften and forgive her. I should have pushed Julia to prove her loyalty, but instead, I asked where she'd been for the past 4 days. She looked so relieved that I was even speaking to her, almost breaking into a smile before catching herself. She admitted she'd stayed at Andrew's place, too ashamed to face her parents and tell them I'd kicked her out for cheating. She figured her folks would have disowned her too, given how close she was to them. She swore Andrew didn't lay a finger on her while she was there, claiming she slept on his couch and spent the whole time thinking about me, how much she loved me, and how she'd ruined everything. She was determined to fix our marriage and make us happy again. But her words rang hollow. How could I ever trust her? Every time she left the house, I'd wonder who she was meeting. Every text or call would make me question who was on the other end. Her betrayal had shattered my ability to love without doubt, and I knew moving forward would never be easy. Against my better judgment, I let her back into my life. Looking back, I cringe at my weakness, but I was still in love with her, and she'd worked hard to wear me down. For a while, Julia was everything you'd want in a wife. Attentive, loving, the whole 9 yards. We cut Andrew out completely. I never saw or heard from him again, and as far as I knew, neither did she. 3 years passed, and we started talking about kids again. Julia was set on experiencing pregnancy and childbirth, and there was a fertility clinic tied to her hospital where insurance covered artificial insemination. She was eager to start, pointing out that she wasn't getting any younger and wanted at least 2 kids. I agreed, and we booked an appointment at the clinic. We jumped through all the hoops, paperwork, tests, and picking an anonymous donor we thought was a good fit. Julia came home one day and said they'd set a date for the insemination procedure. Problem was, it was scheduled for a morning when I had a critical meeting with a potential client, a big HOA looking for a new property management company. This deal could have been a game changer for our business, and I couldn't miss it. I was frustrated that Julia picked a time I couldn't be there, especially since she knew about my meeting. It felt like she'd done it on purpose. I asked her to reschedule so I could be by her side, but she brushed it off, saying it was a quick procedure and I probably wouldn't even be allowed in the room. She told me to focus on my meeting, promising to fill me in on everything later. We argued, but she insisted she didn't want to delay, claiming it was the best time of the month for the procedure to succeed. She said she could handle it alone and head back to work afterward. I offered to move my meeting, but she got mad, calling me ridiculous and saying it wasn't a big deal. She wasn't a kid who needed her hand held. She won the fight, so she went to the clinic, and I went to my meeting, feeling uneasy about the whole thing. Julia got pregnant, and we were over the moon. The pregnancy went smoothly, and Julia was glowing, always wearing a smile like she was living a dream. But after her affair with Andrew, I'd never fully trusted her again. To ease my suspicions, I started dropping by the hospital unannounced to take her to lunch. I'd show up out of the blue, checking to make sure she was where she said she'd be. My trust issues were a constant shadow, a reminder of why taking back a cheater is a bad idea. You're always wondering if they're up to something. But I lived with it, needing to know she was faithful. Every time I surprised her, she was either on the hospital floor or in the break room, exactly where she was supposed to be. She could tell I was keeping tabs on her, but she seemed happy to prove she wasn't sneaking around like she had with Andrew. About 5 weeks into her pregnancy, I was heading into the hospital for one of my surprise lunch visits when I ran into a nurse from the fertility clinic we'd worked with. She stopped to chat, congratulated me on the pregnancy, and asked how Julia and I were holding up. I told her we were thrilled and couldn't wait to meet the baby, thanking her for her help. She grinned and called it a miracle baby. Confused, I asked what she meant. She explained that Julia had found out she was pregnant right before the scheduled insemination, like some kind of divine timing. She even joked that my sperm must have made it after all. since we'd learned we were expecting just in time. Her words hit me like a brick. I asked if she might be mixing us up with another couple, but she was certain. She didn't have any other patients who got pregnant naturally right before an insemination. She said everyone at the clinic was thrilled for us, calling us the miracle baby couple. I was stunned, barely managing to thank her before she walked off. My mind was racing. I wanted to storm up to Julia's floor and confront her, but I knew causing a scene at her workplace could get me thrown out or worse. Instead, I went home, skipping lunch with her that day. Driving back, I racked my brain for an explanation. Maybe the nurse was wrong, or they'd confused us with someone else. The clinic saw tons of couples, after all. But my gut was screaming again, just like it had when I first learned about Andrew. Then it hit me. Our insurance company would have a record of the insemination procedure, since they'd cover the cost. When I got home, I logged into the insurance website and checked our medical history. There were records of our clinic visits, tests, Julia's OBGYN appointments, and ultrasounds, but no insemination procedure. Julia had gotten pregnant without any help from the clinic, and it sure as hell wasn't by me. My anger built as I sat there, waiting for Julia to get home from work. By the time she walked through the door, I was furious, barely holding it together. I decided to stay calm, hoping to get the truth out of her without a screaming match. But after everything, her tears, her promises, her 40-minute crying fit outside my door 3 years ago, I knew getting her to come clean wouldn't be easy. When Julia got home, I was ready to unleash all my anger, but I held back just enough to get answers. I told her to sit down, because we needed to talk. She flashed a smile, starting to ramble about her day and how she'd booked a sonogram for the following Tuesday at 11, asking if I could make it. I cut her off, asking who the father of her baby was. Her face went pale, just like it had years ago when I confronted her about Andrew, and I could see her trying to figure out how much I knew. She mumbled that the donor was anonymous, as if I'd forgotten our clinic plan. I pressed again, asking who the father really was. She called my question ridiculous and stood up, saying she'd start dinner. I shouted for her to sit back down, and the fear in her eyes showed she knew I wasn't messing around. I told her I knew the clinic hadn't inseminated her. She insisted it was the only way she could have gotten pregnant, but I wasn't buying it. I showed her the insurance printout, no record of any insemination procedure. I demanded to know who the father was, saying she'd gotten pregnant the old-fashioned way. She tried to claim the insurance company made a mistake, but I shut that down. Finally, she broke, sobbing uncontrollably, repeating, "I'm so sorry," over and over. I waited, stone-faced, until she could speak. Through tears, she admitted she'd run into Andrew at the hospital, supposedly when he was there for blood work for a physical. They chatted briefly, caught up, and said goodbye. This was right around the time we started going to the clinic. She claimed she didn't want an anonymous donor for our baby, and since Andrew's medical history checked out, healthy, no risk of passing on diseases, she decided he could be the father without him or me knowing. She said it was just another form of insemination, no different from the clinic's process, and meant nothing to her emotionally. I didn't believe a word of it. The timing was too convenient. Andrew just happened to be there, and she just happened to schedule her procedure when I couldn't be at the clinic. It was clear she'd been seeing him again, using the clinic as a cover to get pregnant by him. I asked how they found time to meet up. She admitted that when we'd agreed she'd take double shifts at the hospital to bank sick and vacation time for maternity leave. She wasn't always working. The hospital offered decent maternity leave, but only at half pay. So we planned for her to use her accrued time to stay home longer at full pay. Sometimes, when she told me she was pulling a double, she was with Andrew instead. It was all calculated, a scheme to keep her affair going while I thought she was planning for our future. Furious, I told her I wanted a divorce and that she needed to pack and leave. From now on, we'd only communicate through lawyers. She cried harder, saying she was sorry, that she loved only me, and that she believed I'd take her back like I did before. She insisted we loved each other too much to split, that we had a wonderful child on the way, and that Andrew would never know he was the father. But I was done. Her tears and promises didn't sway me this time. After an hour of me repeating that we were over and that I never wanted to see her again, she finally left. I think she hoped I'd cool off and forgive her like last time, but that wasn't happening. Throughout the divorce process, she left me voicemails, pleading for another chance. In one, she even said the only thing she wanted more than the baby was me, offering to terminate the pregnancy if it meant I take her back. I ignored every message, too hurt and angry to engage. The divorce finalized a little over a year later, and I haven't seen Julia since. My lawyer told me she went after Andrew for child support, but he's been fighting it, refusing to pay. I hope they're stuck battling it out for years. It's what they deserve. I'm 47 now, and I remarried 3 years ago, in my mid-40s, after spending a long time single, reflecting on my mistakes. My new wife is incredible, everything I need in a partner, and I love her deeply. We decided before getting married not to have kids, a choice I'm at peace with. When I think of Julia, it's only with regret. Regret that she was a cheater who never changed. Regret that I took her back after her first betrayal. And regret that I didn't walk away sooner. Looking back, I see where I went wrong. I got married too young, barely knowing myself or Julia. And I made the biggest mistake by taking her back after she cheated the first time. No matter what a cheater says, no matter the tears or promises, it never ends well. My advice to anyone out there: if someone betrays you, throw them to the curb and don't look back. Trust your gut, watch for red flags, and don't let love blind you to the truth. Sharing this story wasn't easy. Reliving the pain of having my heart shattered was brutal. But if it helps even one person avoid the mistakes I made, it's worth it.